The next hook that you wanted to talk about is hook 74, and this one's a little deeper, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts. The hook is look forward with how, not backward with why. I know that there are a lot of thought leaders who suggest the opposite, really. They want you to focus on the why, not the how. And so I believe this is a matter of perspective. I write in the book, solving the problem of how things can be better next time propels the discussion forward. Why is accusatory and demands reasoning. How can be presented simply as a better way. And I wrote this primarily for managers, people that are making decisions, but it also informs a relationship. If you can begin to move the conversation to how we're going to do it better next time and find agreement, then you may miss out on and you can skip over the why it happened conversation. So I'm going to set the mic down and I'm going to let you go.
This one is so nutrient dense. This one is fascinating. I agree with you that the word why can be risky to use. You say why is accusatory and demands reasoning. Why can be accusatory. It doesn't have to be, but even in counseling school, they taught us don't use the word why. If you need to get at why something happened, don't use the word why. It's too loaded.
Right.
You know, I have settled on the phrase, well, you know, how come that is? I mean, it's clunky grammar, but it's not that triggery word of why. Why? I do think that there are lots of situations where it's valuable to understand why something happened, but it's not an either or. It's not either why or how. I mean, certainly I'm more focused on the side of how can things be more efficient? How can they be better for everyone involved? How can we strike an equitable balance? Like if we're talking about a band, how can we have systems that either work for everyone or they're equally inconvenient for everyone?
Yes.
Right?
Just is how it is.
Right. Well, I think that there is value in figuring out each person's why and helping them to find if they need an individual plan for how they're going to be able to adhere to, you know, a rule or a policy, or how they're going to be able to fit into a strategy. That is absolutely worth doing. And so putting on my industrial organizational psych hat, this is often what I'm called to do in a company group setting where there's one individual who, for whatever reason, just struggles to go along with whatever the policies are. Instead of just haranguing that person to just do it, I'll help to figure out what is different about this policy for you. Why does this policy not fit you? And, you know, they recognize, yeah, it's the rule. I'm supposed to do it. If I don't do it long enough, I'm going to get fired. And I'll say, well, okay, fair. But the boss has brought me in to work with you because they recognize that you're valuable as a human resource. And they want me to help to figure out, like, what's the disconnect here? So if we look at a band where one member is chronically late to rehearsal, to gigs, to, you know, I'm having flashbacks to situations that I was involved with where, you know, this has happened, and it can be traumatizing for everyone involved when it's a really high stakes gig and there's one person, you know, who's endangering it for everyone. But I will still look at, okay, what is it about the circumstances that is causing this person to be chronically late? And how can I help them to not do that, right? Because it's very rare that it's somebody who's trying to be difficult. I mean, it does sometimes happen, but it's really rare that somebody is just trying to have power and torture everybody by holding up the whole thing and making everybody sweat until they get there. It's more likely that the person has a poor intuition about time, or they have what we call one more thing-itis. You know, before you can get out the door, I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to do one more thing, and then you're late. Or they have an aversion to being early because they consider that a form of wasting time, or they overpromised something to their family and then they couldn't get out the door. I mean, there are a million ways that I can empathize with a person who is chronically late. I know that when it's a pattern, then there's something going on that's causing it. And so from that perspective, it's worth understanding the why, because understanding the why generates empathy. So then you're not just saying, okay, you just have to stop doing that, or saying, okay, we're just going to change the policy to accommodate this. I mean, instead, you can really understand what's happening in this person's world that's making it so that, you know, they're constantly late. If you just tell them an earlier time, you know, if you look back at it and statistically they're 20 minutes late, okay, well, I'm just going to tell them a 30 minute earlier arrival time. Not only are they going to catch on, because, you know, I mean, they're just going to catch on. I mean, they might show up on time one time and everybody else is, you know, 30 minutes late, and they're like, oh, you just told me that time because, you know, you wanted me to be on time. And it's not helping to really address the core problem, right? So the manager is still having to make this sneaky accommodation to trick this person into being on time. That's not addressing all of the resentment that it causes in the rest of the group. You know, well, does this mean that they don't respect the project? Does this mean that they don't respect us? Why don't they respect our time? Why can't they be on time? All of that is toxic. And just looking at the how are we going to work around this is an incomplete solution, I think.
Okay.
So the how
yeah.
needs to include some elements of the why. It needs to be informed by the why.
Right. And I appreciate the challenge here. I mean, because that in essence, you're saying that to take it deeper. I can recall many conversations, and not defending, but just as we discuss here, I can recall many conversations where I would ask why, and we would talk, and we would about different matters as I managed the band or managed other things, and we would just have conversation after conversation after conversation, and so when I began to change, I learned that the learning why was not working, because I knew why, and we heard why, and we talked about why, and we addressed why, and it still didn't change. And so as I began to change the how, I didn't just change the how, and I'm not challenging you, not to trick. I just put other things around the how, right? Rather than just showing up for the performance, it's also when we're running our rehearsal. I knew someone that would would schedule rehearsals every week, but that's when you got your paycheck, at the rehearsal, right? So it was ways to, there are ways, just from my experience, there are ways to structure the how we are going to do things that that have, at least for me as a manager, a business owner, as a band leader, that removed me having these long conversations of why that never really did change anything. There are some other, I'm going to just really make this even more convoluted. There's some other hooks in the book that relate to this, right? But I'm going to tell a story that I book a handful of rooms, and I'm the sort of the musical director or the show director in these rooms. And so one of the performers we had in there, he was running a particular show, in a way that wasn't appropriate for the room. And I remember just having a long, drawn out conversation, and we were arguing about the type. It turned into an argument about the type of show that he was running, and that wasn't the point of the conversation, because his show was great. It just wasn't great for our room, right? And so rather than go through the, well, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? It was just simply, this is the type of show that we want. And there are 3 hooks that I think that can relate to the how and why hook, which again says, look forward with how, not back with why. Yeah. One is behavior. This is hook number 32. Behavior you tolerate from others is how they will respond.
Yep.
Hook 33, give someone as many chances as you can tolerate, right? Yeah. And then hook number 9, perform the show you were hired to perform. If you don't agree with the direction, don't take the gig.
Yep.
I'm as a manager, I'm not being so, my fist is not pounding down on the table saying, this is how it is, my way, the highway, that kind of thing. But I did find over time on matters such as showing up on time or answering your emails or attending this rehearsal or learning this song or whatever it may be, following the show format. Yeah. Sometimes it's just easier to say, look, this is just how it is. This is it. And if you want the gig, this is the gig. If you can't agree with it, then don't take the gig.
What we're talking about here is boundaries.
Okay.
This is boundaries. This is establishing, articulating, clarifying, reinforcing boundaries. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I'm smiling because I was thinking that before you said these 3 hooks, and then all 3 of these apply to that. Give someone as many chances as you can tolerate. How often are you going to allow your boundaries to be breached?
Yeah.
Behavior you tolerate from others is how they will respond. And I wrote in my copy, we teach people how to treat us.
There you go.
This is a fundamental truth. Perform the show you were hired to perform. In other words, respect the boundaries. If you don't agree with the direction, don't take the gig. If you aren't going to respect the boundaries, don't say you will. And so part of, I'm imagining these painful, lengthy conversations of where you're hearing about the why. In a typical counseling or consulting or coaching strategy around that would be, yes, I'm going to give you unconditional positive regard as I listen to the why. And I'm also going to ask you, how can this change to be more in line with the established boundary that, that you're not in line with right now? And so, yes, I'm respecting that this is where you are. And also, what's our solution to bring us more in alignment? So that is much easier to do if your boundaries have already been articulated. If you're able, in a conversation about someone being late multiple times, it's much easier if you're able to say, hey, remember when I first hired you and I told you that it was really important to me that everybody is always on time, right? That is more effective than saying, hey, I might not have made this clear to you before, but it's really important to me that everybody is on time. Now, you can still do that. And if the boundary wasn't established in the beginning and it needs to be established now, then that's fine. And you do it now. Mm-hmm. But, it's that clarifying of these are the things that have to happen this way in order for the project to work. So part of the how is, all of the other parts of the how are contingent on this one, which is people are on time, right? And so you're helping that person to empathize with why the rule exists. So this is another derivation of the why. People will be more inclined to inconvenience themselves to follow a rule or a policy if they understand the purpose of it. And so I'll give you an example. I produced the 50th anniversary Woodstock concert at the Austin Public Library in 2019. We had 9 bands, and the bands had been promised a slot before they brought me in as the stage manager of it. And then I had a certain time frame that I had to fit everybody into. So I had to accommodate 9 performances within this, period of hours, and I had to accommodate top of the hour station IDs for co-op radio because they were simulcasting it live on the radio. Mm-hmm. So my run of show had to work around station IDs, top of the hour, 9 bands in, I forget exactly how many hours it was. But the upshot of it is we needed 5-minute changeovers.
Wow.
Right. And it was backlined.
Okay, but still.
Okay, it's backlined, but still. And the more seasoned artists on the bill were very kind in how they told me that they didn't believe that I would do that. They didn't believe that I'd be able to pull that off. And so I said, okay, well, I feel like I have your buy-in at least. And they're like, yeah, you have my buy-in. Yeah, I'll hit my mark, but by the time it comes to me, I'm expecting that the show's going to be running late. Well, I did pull it off. And the way that I pulled it off was by explaining to every one of those artists individually why it was so important to stay on time. Because if we don't stay on time and co-op misses their station ID, they could be fined by the FCC. And we don't want that. We have the power to not have that happen. Mm-hmm. So when I cue you, you need to go on. And when I cue you to end, you need to end because, we need to flip the stage quickly. And so because I reinforced the why to all of the artists and I showed them that, I'm giving them the longest possible set time because I want them to be able to show as much of their art as possible.
Right.
And I respect their ability to, get on, get off, do it quickly. I know that they're capable of it. I'm going to hold up my end of the bargain by getting the people before them off. Then they need to hold up their end of the bargain by getting off when it's time to get off. And it worked. And I believe the reason it worked is because I didn't just run a show and say, do this. Hi, I'm Debbie. I know you don't know me, or maybe you do, but do this. Here is the timing. Hit it. I advanced them with an explanation as to why this really, truly matters. So I didn't BS them with, it matters because I want it. I showed them it's not just because you're going to please me. Mm-hmm. It's because it's part of a bigger plan. And so it will be worth it to you and very much appreciated if you do it like this, because you will then be congruent with this bigger plan.
Right. So where would you resort to how rather than why? Because to be clear, yeah. I'm the example here that I'm the analogy. Matt ran a band, and Matt would talk to certain people over the years that needed to be reminded, and this is why, and over and over and yeah. over. And then Matt learned, well, a good management style is not iron fist, but more just working on the how. I'm going to expand just a little bit more. I found that in some of my personal conversations, either with my wife or my mother or father, whatever, at times, if there was some frustration, which it happens, I would go back and think, my go-to is, Matt, how can you, me, have a better conversation? How can you control your emotions better? Rather than get on the phone with them and say, why are we having such a hard time talking? Right. I just find a way to contribute and lead the conversation and make it how can I do this better? Right. So yeah. I've convoluted the question, but again, you've talked about the why. Do you ever get to the point where it's just, it finally gets to how? This is how we're doing it. We've talked.
Yeah. And that boundaries clarification is kind of in between the why and the how. So yes, it does sometimes get to a point that what how looks like is we're parting ways. And you can help people to not be surprised by that. If, let's go back to the example of, the person who's chronically late. Mm-hmm. you have a talk with them. You say, is there something that we can do to accommodate you to help you to be on time? You know, is there some logistical problem? Like, you know, your day job ends at 5 o'clock. We've got rehearsal at 6. I thought that was enough time. Is that not actually enough time for you to get here? It's not? Okay, cool. If we moved rehearsal to 7, would you be on time? Yes? Okay, great. So 7 o'clock comes around for the next 3-4 weeks, and you know they're on time. And then the next few times now they're late. Now you go back and you say, so hey, we all changed our timing to accommodate you, and it worked for a while, and now you're late again. So I mean, you know, I just need to let you know that this is the time.
Yes.
And so if this continues to be a problem, then, you know, it's not going to work. I mean, we like, it's not going to work out with us. So, I mean, is there anything else that you can think of that needs to happen, because we're not changing the time again? And like, are you clear that you need to be here by 7 for rehearsal, and rehearsal is part of your responsibility to stay in this project? I mean, you know, is that, do we get that? Are we on the same page?
So,
Because like and then another way to say it is, you know, from this point forward, if you don't come on time, then do you understand that you're self-selecting out of this project? Like, I won't fire you, you'll be quitting. Do you understand that?
yes. And so,
Yeah.
so ultimately, uh, really, really, really not really, really, but the hooks on being tolerant really segue into the how and why.
Yeah.
Okay, but behavior you tolerate from others is how they will respond. Give
Mm-hmm.
someone as many chances as you can tolerate.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, you bring in, look forward with how, not backwards with why. Because during the toleration phase, is that a good way to say it, is when you're going over the why. You
Yes.
know, I'm being tolerant here. Why are you doing that? Why are you saying that? Why are you acting this way?
Right.
Oh, it's bothering me, but I'm going to put up with it. Maybe I'm going to talk about it a little bit, and then at some point, I can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
And then you have to decide. And maybe it's not that emotional or that dramatic.
Yeah, I've seen it done entirely devoid of emotion. I've seen people who are
Right.
able to do this very matter of factly, and who have articulated, you know, here is what's going to happen next if this happens again. And you know, it can be helpful if a person is at all familiar with a standard process in corporate world for, you know, what an HR write-up sequence looks like. You know, first there's an unofficial verbal warning, then there's a verbal warning that's documented in your file, then there's a written warning, there's a probation period.
Okay.
And all of these are this happens because, you know, for legal purposes, you have to have a very structured process of discipline that would ultimately lead to termination. You can apply the same philosophy in your own small business, in your own music business. The core principles here are: we're establishing what the boundaries are, we're establishing what is non-negotiable, and we're telling you what's going to happen if you do it again. And then if you do it again, you know, and what is the ultimate, you know, end point here? What is the terminal point here? And understand that if you proceed through all of those steps, by the time you reach the end, you'll be quitting. You're effectively quitting. You're not getting fired, you're quitting. Because you're not keeping up with the requirements of the job. I remember one of my very first jobs, I mean, like teenager in high school, I learned this concept, not personally, but by watching other people, that if they didn't show up for work, and, maybe it was like 3 times in a row, then they were terminated, but it was considered job abandonment, and so they were legally categorized as having quit the job. And I'd see so many people who would say, I didn't quit. I never told you I quit. Well, but you did tell them behaviorally by not showing up.
Ultimately, they didn't agree to the how.
Right. Exactly. And so, but there, it was just always remarkable to me, this difference between, you know, there is a way of passively quitting, you know, and so no, it's not true that you were fired. You actually, it was job abandonment. You quit this job.
You chose to not to adhere to the how rule
Right.
eventually, and so
Right.
your actions were speaking louder than your words of "I want to have this job."
Right. And so
Um,
when you talk about, you know, you'll tolerate a behavior for as long as you can tolerate it, I think part of the process for you as the person who's tolerating it, you need to be really clear about the how do I put this? When is it more efficient to replace the person's role in your life? So like if we're thinking of, you know, a band member, like your theremin player. I'm picking an instrument that I don't actually know anybody who plays it, so nobody can say I'm talking about them.
Right.
Your theremin player. Well, okay. Have you, like, you're having all kinds of problems with your theremin player. They don't show up on time, or they show up drunk, or whatever.
And they're playing the theremin.
And they're playing the theremin, which you can't tell whether they're doing a good job or not because it's
Right.
the theremin.
Yeah. Why your band to begin with? Okay. Yeah.
Well, maybe your band is like, you know, requires a theremin.
Yeah.
But you need to, as the decision maker, as the one who's deciding where the boundary is and what's going to be the last straw, you yourself have to get really clear about what am I going to do, you know, if this theremin player, you know, self-selects out. Are we going to replace them? Are we going to change the style? You know, what can we do instead? Because if you have thought through your own alternative how, if you have made a plan, a plan B, right, then you can be more efficient in making your decision about this problematic theremin player.
Yes.
Because you're clear that you have another option. So you're not going to hold out longer and resent it more because you actually don't know what you'll do. You know, like
that's part of the tolerance level.
Right.
Is sometimes you tolerate because you don't have another option.
Or you don't think you have another option because you haven't thought it through, because you don't want to jinx it, because you don't want to, you know, make another plan and then, you know, think that this person is going to feel the vibe of you plotting against them. I mean, these are all things that I've heard, you know. So, yeah, part of not tolerating being treated poorly or being treated in a way that you don't want to be treated, part of not tolerating that is having a plan for, you know, what you'll do once you do finally, you know, assert that boundary, you know. And if you give the person an ultimatum and they choose to leave, you have to know that, okay, I already have a plan in place. I'm going to pivot and it's going to be fine.
Right. I think what I'm finding here is that there's a theme. I write here in hook number 58. The hook doesn't necessarily identify directly, but I write some of the hook. The hook is never order food on break. You want to have time to eat it. And that's in essence what I'm saying here is you need to stay focused but not adding to the plan willy-nilly, right? But in that hook I write, if you enjoy a relationship, stay on script. Okay? So we're all like actors in a play. And if you're enjoying the way things are going, you continue to act like you normally act. I'll continue to act like I normally act, and things will continue to go. If I want to change something, what I write, if you want to change something about a relationship, change your role. Right? So I think here is that my experiences as a manager, as a band leader, as a business owner, that I it seems I went through a lot of these conversations about the show, about load in, about what we're wearing, about song selection, just over and over and over. And I think that maybe I learned that um, I wasn't in a position to change people's minds. I wasn't going to change someone. In fact, I write in the book, there's another hook. People can change, just don't expect them to. Right.
Right. Yep.
And so then I started to think, okay, I'm not going to change them. And I tried many conversations. And by the way, I'm not speaking negatively about anybody. This is just, we needed organization and rules to run the show or the band, whatever. So I wasn't going to change their mind. I wasn't going to change this guy's opinion about how he wanted to do, what he thought the best show was. I wasn't going to change the owner's opinion about how they wanted their venue to present the show.
Right.
I wasn't going to change someone's opinion about how they needed to manage their life and manage their time and things like that. And so it got to the point where I tolerated as much as I could. And then I just said, look, kindly, I mean, I don't think I was rude about it. I was just running the show, running the band, running the business. Here's the how. Here's how we're going to do it. And let's all do our best to adhere to the rules. And if you can't, then it goes to the other hook in the book where it says, don't fire, just don't rehire.
There's that too. Yes.
So you just kind of, you find a way to keep the relationship going, but you say, you know what, it's not working for you, not working for us. And maybe that's how I changed the role. So I see that theme going along, and I can't say, I'm not going to say by any means that it's exact the way that needs to be done. I just know that it turned out to be a management tactic and strategy that began to work for me. Does that make sense?
It does. Can we have a timeout?
Sure.
I need a bio break. I'll be right back.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'm back, and I'm going to make the edit easy for you. I'm just going to jump right back into that answer.
Okay.
It does make sense. And it takes us back to our discussion of conscious competence earlier, where when, as a manager, you know that this is what you're doing, you know that this is your strategy, then you're going to be more effective because you've already articulated the boundary, and you already know what your next steps are going to be. You mentioned about, don't fire, just don't rehire.
Mm-hmm.
That works great when we're talking about, like booking a venue. You're not committing someone to, like a long-term residency. You're hiring them show by show, right?
Yeah. Contract labor. It's
harder when someone has an ongoing position in your band.
That's right. It is.
Right? Yep. But you can develop that conscious competence around how you'll manage that simply by having this conversation with yourself. Mm-hmm. Having role plays in your head. Well, what would I do if somebody was chronically late? Or what would I do if, I don't want them to, drink before the show. how am I going to head off these possible problems? What policies am I going to put in place from the beginning so nobody can say that I'm singling them out? And these are the kinds of things that band leaders and managers and talent buyers just develop over time, as a list of policies. When you start working with someone, maybe it's terms of engagement, and you can often you can tell that there's a horror story behind every line in that thing.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So, but I think that one of the valuable nuggets here is there is value in planning, in anticipating what would I do in these situations. And if you find yourself in one of them that you didn't plan for, then that the sooner that you clarify the boundaries, the sooner that you have the conversation with the person who's not doing what you want them to be doing, the better off you'll be, because otherwise it's just going to breed resentment, and they're not going to understand, why you're, having the attitude you're having, right?
Yes.
But I also agree, like, in the first hook that we talked about, determine the most efficient way to allocate your most valuable resources. If it's contract labor and, this is a one-time thing and you don't have to hire this person back again, don't invest a lot of time in trying to, shepherd them over into your way of doing things. You just, if you can see that they're going to be resistant, then you just don't hire them again.
Right.
Yeah.
You've brought some clarity to me. I'm going to try to articulate this. You keep saying clarify the boundaries in the beginning. Okay. So, but, and one reason that I say just get to the how and not the why is because, and I don't have the words right in front of me now, but, here, why is accusatory and demands reasoning. You ask somebody, well, why? Well, now you got to answer, and it's now a whole thing. And if you get to that point, you're asking somebody why, there's a point of contention. Yes, most likely. But, and this is excellent, if you clarify the boundaries, managers listen, everybody listen. If you clarify the boundaries in the beginning and you say, and you lay it out, kind of like you did on the festival, this is why we're going to do this to everybody. There's not a lot of emotion. There's not a lot of anger. It's like you're just telling everybody, this is how we're doing it, and this is why we're doing it. And no one's upset because no one's broken the rules yet.
Exactly.
Over and over again, right? So if you clarify your boundaries in the beginning and you set the why, or set the why and the how, then that might alleviate a lot of difficult conversations down the road.
Right.
What we could add to this hook, and it's okay because I believe a book is a living thing, right?
Yep.
Is maybe the hook could read also, clarify your boundaries, look forward with how, not backward with why. And so in the step, when you're creating the new how, there's a problem, we're going to create a new how. You can say, this is why we're creating the new how. Is that fair? Am I on to something?
I think you are. Yes. Yeah, I think you are. An idea that I had recently, that will be in the next iteration of my book, because I agree with you. A book is, it's, as soon as you publish it, you're going to have new ideas. So you just have to, come up with a new version. But something that I think would be a really great way to anticipate changes in a band. You form a band and you have to recognize that everyone is going to grow at different rates. And so, they're going to grow emotionally, they're going to grow in their skill, their lives are going to change. You might all be in the same place or in a compatible place right now. In a year from now, that might not be true. And instead of that showing up as some big heartbreak, anticipate that a year from now, everyone's likely to be different, and it would be smart of us to have a process every year I don't want to use like, business jargon of an annual review, but
Yeah.
every year we're just we're gonna check in and say, hey, is this still a fit for all of us?
We
Are
still
we
go,
still
yeah.
compatible? And I mean, some of the examples that where this has come up recently are a band that has grown, you know, like, four of the five members have had some huge growth spurts in their ability on their instrument, and now there's one person in the band whose ability has stayed at the same level, and the rest of the band is ready to do more complicated things, but they can't because this band member isn't able to do it.
Right.
And so, if they had had the understanding in the beginning of, hey, every year we're going to talk about whether we're all still compatible in every way to do this project. If that had been expected, then when that annual meeting comes around, that one person might be able to say, you know, I don't want to hold you guys back. I know that you've all like grown way past what I'm capable of, and you know, yeah, how about if I help you to find somebody that's, that can take my place, or at the very least, yeah, I can understand why you would want me to bow out so that you can proceed on, and then the rest of the band, I mean, maybe they'll say, you know what, man, we love you for so many other reasons, we want to keep you. Maybe we'll have a sub for recording, but for live, we want to keep you if you want to stay. I mean, you can have much more empathetic, collaborative conversations when you've established those expectations in the beginning. But it takes so much planning to establish those expectations in the beginning.
It does, which is an excellent kind of bow to the conversation. Something that I learned from the last episode that was released was with Nicole Brogdon, a licensed therapist, and she began to point out that a lot of the things that we were talking about on the performance, on ways to have a better performance and not get bogged down in all the stuff in your head, is a process oriented approach, which is a lot of what I talk about in the book. Process oriented approach, follow a certain process, don't worry necessarily about the result, follow the process. So as you were talking and I'm looking at everything we talked about, one thing that I want listeners and those that are watching, on the hook, this On the Hook with Matt Wilson, the podcast here, is to be able to take something away, other that we actually just kind of lay it out for them and tell them, because I mean, you've given so much wonderful, valuable information in this. And so I'm going to try to summarize it a little bit. And then I want you to do the same, if that's okay, and
Okay.
even challenge me. But what I'm hearing is, okay, so I was thinking, I like to solve problems. So then you do a process oriented approach, and ultimately how versus why, how finds solutions. So that's where I'm coming from a lot. So when I say look forward with how, not backward with why, you've added in there, and I like it, is to set the boundaries in the beginning as you're laying out how we're going to do this. Set the boundaries and tell why. Part of the boundaries explain why we're doing what we're doing. Then lay down the how, right? And then hopefully people will go. Then you go through are we being tolerate as much as you can, and then if you can't anymore, then as you're resetting the how, if you need to reset the boundaries at the time, that way you're not getting bogged down in the why discussions when it's emotional and people aren't doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So that's for the hook 74. As we talked about with the hook 70, determine the most efficient way to allocate your most valuable resources, I gravitated to the realizing that there is identifying your frustration tolerance, that most of us are simply not willing to go through the planning stages to identify time, talent, and money, or if there's another valuable component in there, valuable resource to your endeavor. Oftentimes we just want to go, as you said. We want to go. We want to do this now because it's frustrating to be slow and meticulous about the planning. Um, and then just to, once you identify these things, and most likely once you've identified these resources and you determine the best way to move forward and how to invest your time, you probably have a better chance of having a successful project. What do you think? Did I kind of
Yeah,
tie
I
that
think
up?
you did. Yeah. You said you said most people don't want to go through it. I would be optimistic and say some people don't want to go through that.
Okay.
I think maybe it's fair to say that most people wouldn't automatically recognize the payoff for going through the preparation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the only reason that it's so easy for me is because I've done it so many times and I've helped other people do it so many times that I just automatically know that there's inherent value in spending some time on the front end, building a system, building a plan. So, I just have been in a unique position to, have a lot of wins with that. Um, I'll tell a story on my husband, which he he always smiles when I tell the story because this was a super fun moment. I was giving a speech many years ago, and it was like in a ballroom where they were seated at round top tables.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a wireless mic, and I was just kind of walking around doing my talk and pointing at my slides. And I ended up in a spot in the room where I said something, whatever next point I was making, and I hear this voice behind me say, "Man, being married to you must be hell."
Whoa.
And it was a male voice, and the room was mostly women because it was like a women's luncheon, but there were some men there who were representing vendors who were kind of like associate members of the group or whatever. Mm-hmm. So there were very few men in the room. One of them said this. All of the women just gasped. And I love a good heckler. So I just turned around and I said, "Really?" And he said, "Your husband must just hate being married to you." And I said, "Well, let's ask him. He's sitting right behind you." And he was.
Yeah.
And he was. And the guy just turns and.
Yeah.
And my poor husband, who is not comfortable with public speaking, let alone being put on the spot like that, being on the hook, right?
Yeah.
I handed him the mic. I'm like, "Go ahead, honey, answer his question." And he goes, "Well, tell you the truth, when we first got together, I thought she had an awful lot of, anal retentive rules, but, you go along to get along." Yeah. And over time, I realized, no, it really does work better her way. Like these systems that she's got for the house, everything she's telling you up on the slides up there, yeah, it really makes life easier. And, the heckler guy was like, "Okay." And the women are cheering, but the fun takeaway from that was that here is the person, my husband, who is not naturally organized, who is very much the person who wants to just do the work. He wants to do the job. He sees what needs to be done. He wants to dive in, but just in being adjacent to me, he has recognized the value of spending some time preparing to do the job, spending some time planning, and then doing the physical preparation and then doing the job. And over time, he's developed some frustration tolerance for, yeah, I really want to just get to it, but I know that this planning is going to pay off. So I'm going to put in some time, getting ready before I do the thing. So
when you were talking just then and you said, put a system in place, in my mind, because I'm always making up new projects, I'm always doing things, I had a reaction like, oh. And it took me back to when I was a young man. I was trying to raise money for my business, and I met with some business man, very serious, and he asked me, he goes, "Well, do you have a prospectus?" And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm a band, I write music, let's make some money, throw some money, let's record. But no, he was like, "Look, you got to show me how this is going to be profitable or where we're going to spend our money. We got to really make this happen." And then when you just said, as you start a project, get a system in place, my first thought was, oh, that's so much work to really plan. But I've learned that is a frustration response. And if I identify it and say, okay, you're just frustrated with that work that goes before, but but if you do that work, you have a better chance of being successful than if you didn't. Right?
Yep.
That's so cool.
That's
Frustration
exactly it.
tolerance, I think.
Yeah.
So, Debbie, I mean, I'd say I could talk all night, but we really have. I mean, this has been a long, wonderful conversation, and I mean that. I don't mean to highlight on the long, because I've just really enjoyed it. Um, is there anything else that you'd want to say that could be helpful to someone listening, or one last point you wanted to make sure that the listeners walk away with here?
Yeah, whenever I'm invited to make one last point, the thing I like to say is back to this phenomenon of chronic disorganization.
Mm-hmm.
People who have just never been able to be naturally organized. They've tried lots of systems. They've bought books. They've bought kits from the store. Nothing really seems to work. That fits the description of chronic disorganization. What I always want people to know is that is not a character flaw. Chronic disorganization is a problem to be solved. It is not a character flaw. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with your brain. It doesn't mean that there's something inherently wrong with you. Even if there is a condition that is diagnosable, like ADD, that still doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means that traditional systems aren't going to work for you, but that's okay. You come up with different ones. You come up with adaptations that are actually going to work for your unique mind. And I mean, whenever I say that to a live audience, there's usually someone who starts crying because they have internalized chronic disorganization as a character flaw. And it's not. It's simply not. I mean, I'm just stating a fact there.
Yeah.
It is.
It's a component that's not working properly, maybe not the right word, but to its potential.
It's something where what our culture delivers us by default just doesn't work for some people. So everyone is capable of being organized, and sometimes they just have to find a way that you're not going to see in a magazine sidebar or in some stupid TV show.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and to know that there's help out there, to know there's a better way, even in something as, I can't say that I would be the first to say, oh yeah, you can go to somebody to help you get organized, and then to the depth of the way that you've described it, even in this conversation, that it's not just someone that's, I'm, like you said, I'm an artist and my brain is flighty and I'm here and there and I'm just writing and I'm thinking all this stuff. No, you're saying that there's some stuff going on that needs to be addressed, that it's okay. It's like other things that we get tied up in our mind or the way that we see the world.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's okay to ask for help, to be more organized. And from that, you'll have a more pleasant life and existence and business relationships and relationships on a personal level too.
Yeah, things will work easier if you're able to amplify the ways that you're already organized, to recognize your to bring to consciousness the competence that you already have and to build on it. And it probably won't look like, what you would see in a standard book or show on organizing. And there's nothing wrong with that. For someone to be ashamed of being disorganized, to me, that would be the equivalent of me being ashamed that I can't play the piano.
Right.
I mean, I wasn't born knowing how to play the piano.
Yeah.
I wasn't born with an aptitude for it. But that's not inherently bad. Same thing.
Right. And and as we tie this together, we can learn how to identify our valuable resources, and we can learn how to set boundaries, and we can learn how to become more tolerant, and we can learn how to set the rules of how and place, and all of these things fall in the category I like to say identify these things so that you know how to make them better, And I know learning more about you, I'm grateful that you're out there helping people. And I know the people that you're helping every day, they're extremely grateful for the work that you do. And I can just tell by talking to you and then also reading your books and such that there's a lot of those people out there benefiting from your knowledge and expertise. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
And thank you for reading the book, and thank you for joining me tonight. This may be episode 2. This may be the second episode because we've talked so much. I might want to split this one up because I think that there's so much good information here, but we will see. But thank you so much for your time tonight, Debbie. And as we wrap here, your website is what?
Thoughtsinorder.com.
Okay. And you have 3 books right now, right?
Well, I have a lot. I have books for professional organizers. My most recent book for, my only book directly for musicians is The Organized Musician. Mm-hmm. And then I have a couple other books that are on there right now for people in the organizing industry. There's one called Newbie Pitfalls for people who are new to the industry. And I talk a lot about these things of, how do you prepare? How do you set boundaries? How do you establish your systems for your business going forward? And then I have one called Ethical Pitfalls, which talks about the ethics of running your business. That one's relevant for any consulting business. But my next book is going to be called Modern Music Patronage.
Okay.
Modern Music Patronage, How to Provide Substantive Support to the Artists You Love in the Post-Pandemic Age of Independent Music.
Wow. And when is that one's coming out? Or is you just kind of working on it right now?
Yep. I'm intending on next year.
Okay.
I have another big project that I can't quite announce that I'll be announcing in maybe a month. That's going to take a lot of my time for the rest of the year. I'm glad that we were able to have you here before you jump in that other project, if that was going to take your time away. And thank you again so much for sharing all of your knowledge with us today. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. I love the book and Station ID again. Yep, there it is. So I love that you're doing this podcast. I think that this is a really great way to amplify the message of the book. So congratulations and kudos for that.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sure that we will talk very, very soon.
Right on.
Have a great evening.
Thanks, you too.